The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Buckingham Palace as Captain James Morrison adjusted his scarlet tunic and checked his ceremonial sword one final time. At 28 years old, Morrison had served as a member of the Queen's Guard for 6 years, standing motionless for hours in all weather conditions, maintaining the highest standards of discipline and precision that the British military was famous for worldwide. His colleagues often joked that he could remain still as a statue even during a thunderstorm, but today would test far more than his ability to stand at attention. Morrison came from a military family that traced its service back 3 generations. His grandfather had fought in World War II, his father had served in the Falklands, and James himself had completed 2 tours in Afghanistan before earning his position among the elite guards who protected the royal family. Standing 6 feet 2 inches tall with broad shoulders and an unwavering gaze, he embodied everything the British public expected from their ceremonial protectors. His uniform was always immaculate, his boots polished to mirror brightness, and his bearing commanded respect from tourists and dignitaries alike. The invitation that changed everything arrived on a Tuesday morning in early September. Colonel Richardson, the commanding officer of Morrison's regiment, called him into his office with an expression that mixed curiosity with concern. The letter bore the official seal of the United States Army and contained an invitation that no British soldier had ever received before. The U.S. Army's Elite Training Division was conducting a special assessment program, testing soldiers from various allied nations to better understand different military traditions and capabilities. They specifically requested that Britain send one of their Queen's Guards to participate in what they called a comprehensive military evaluation. The letter explained that the test would examine physical fitness, mental resilience, tactical thinking, and adaptability under extreme conditions. It would last for 2 weeks at Fort Bragg in North Carolina, one of America's most challenging military installations. The invitation emphasized that this was not a competition, but rather a cultural and military exchange designed to foster better understanding between Allied forces. However, Morrison could read between the lines. The Americans were curious about whether the famous British Guards, known primarily for their ceremonial duties, possessed the same combat readiness as frontline soldiers. Colonel Richardson studied Morrison carefully as he finished reading the invitation. "Morrison, I won't lie to you. This is unprecedented. The Americans have never made such a request before, and, frankly, some people at the Ministry of Defense are questioning their motives. There's a perception among some American military personnel that our ceremonial guards are more for show than actual military capability. This could be their way of testing that theory." Morrison felt a surge of protective pride for his regiment and the centuries of tradition it represented. The Queen's Guard wasn't just about ceremony and pageantry. Every guard was a fully trained soldier who had proven himself in combat situations. The beautiful uniforms and precise movements concealed warriors who had fought in some of the world's most dangerous conflicts. The idea that anyone would view them as mere decorations was both insulting and motivating. "Sir, with respect, I believe this is exactly why we should accept," Morrison replied, his voice steady and confident. "The Queen's Guard has never backed down from a challenge, whether on a battlefield or in defense of our sovereign. If the Americans want to test our capabilities, then we should show them what British military training produces." The colonel nodded slowly, clearly having expected this response. "I thought you might say that. The ministry has already given preliminary approval, pending your acceptance. But, Morrison, you need to understand what you're walking into. Fort Bragg is home to the 82nd Airborne Division, Special Forces, and some of the toughest soldiers in the American military. They train in conditions that would break most men. This isn't going to be a friendly cultural exchange with tea and biscuits." Morrison straightened in his chair, every inch the professional soldier. "Sir, I've served in Afghanistan. I've faced Taliban fighters and survived IED explosions. I've stood guard in freezing rain and blazing sun without moving a muscle for hours at a time. Whatever the Americans have planned, I'm prepared to face it and represent our regiment with honor." The decision was made that afternoon. Within a week, Morrison found himself on a military transport plane crossing the Atlantic, carrying nothing but his standard kit and a letter from his commanding officer that he was instructed to present to the American officers upon arrival. As the plane descended toward North Carolina, Morrison looked out at the vast American landscape below and wondered what challenges awaited him. Fort Bragg sprawled across the countryside like a small city, its buildings and training facilities covering more than 160,000 acres. The moment Morrison stepped off the plane, he could feel the difference in atmosphere. This wasn't a ceremonial posting where precision and tradition were valued above all else. This was a combat training facility where soldiers prepared for the harsh realities of modern warfare. The American soldiers he saw moving about the base carried themselves with the casual confidence of men who spent their days practicing to kill or be killed. Major Sarah Chun, the officer designated to oversee Morrison's evaluation, met him at the airfield. She was a compact, athletic woman in her early 30s with intelligent brown eyes that seemed to take in every detail of his appearance and bearing. Her handshake was firm, her manner professional, but not unfriendly. "Captain Morrison, welcome to Fort Bragg," she said, studying his uniform with obvious interest. "I have to say, you're not quite what we were expecting. Most of our international guests arrive in standard battle dress uniforms. The ceremonial gear is certainly impressive." Morrison had chosen to wear his full dress uniform for the arrival, complete with the famous bearskin hat and red tunic. He wanted to make it clear from the beginning that he was proud of his heritage and wouldn't be intimidated by American military culture. "Major Chun, I represent the Queen's Guard, and I believe it's important to honor that tradition even in informal settings. I hope my appearance won't be a distraction during the evaluation." Major Chun smiled, and Morrison detected a hint of approval in her expression. "Actually, Captain, I think it's perfect. It will remind everyone here that military excellence comes in many forms. Your reputation precedes you, by the way. We've done our homework on the Queen's Guard, and we know that every one of you is a combat veteran. This evaluation isn't about proving your worth as a soldier. It's about understanding how different military cultures produce effective warriors." As they walked toward the administrative building, Major Chun explained the basic structure of the evaluation. Morrison would spend 2 weeks participating in various tests and training exercises alongside American soldiers. Some activities would be individual challenges testing his personal capabilities, while others would require him to integrate with American units and demonstrate his ability to adapt to different tactical approaches. "I won't lie to you, Captain," Major Chun continued as they entered the building. "Some of our people are skeptical about ceremonial guards. They see the pageantry and assume it's all show. But there are others here who understand military history and respect what the Queen's Guard represents. Your performance over the next 2 weeks will help settle some debates that have been going on for years." Morrison spent his first evening at Fort Bragg studying the schedule that Major Chun provided. The evaluation would cover physical fitness, marksmanship, tactical decision-making, leadership under pressure, adaptability to new equipment and procedures, and psychological resilience. Each area would be tested through practical exercises that simulated real combat conditions. Morrison noted with interest that the Americans had designed the evaluation to mirror the selection process used for their own elite units. The physical fitness test was scheduled for the following morning, and Morrison used his remaining time to prepare mentally and physically. He had maintained peak condition throughout his service, but American military fitness standards were notoriously demanding. As he performed his evening routine of stretches and exercises, Morrison reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. His grandfather had often told stories about fighting alongside American soldiers during World War II, describing them as brave and resourceful allies who approached warfare with a different philosophy than their British counterparts. The Americans were more aggressive and improvisational, while the British emphasized discipline and methodical planning. Morrison wondered whether those cultural differences still existed and how they would affect his performance during the evaluation. As he prepared for bed, Morrison received a message from Colonel Richardson wishing him luck and reminding him that he carried the pride of the entire regiment on his shoulders. The weight of that responsibility was both daunting and energizing. Tomorrow would begin a test that could change how the world viewed the Queen's Guard and, by extension, the entire British military tradition. Morrison fell asleep to the sound of helicopters and distant explosions from the training ranges, knowing that in just a few hours, he would begin proving that the scarlet uniform and ceremonial duties of the Queen's Guard concealed the heart and skills of a true warrior. The challenge he had accepted would test everything he had learned in 6 years of elite military service, and failure was not an option he was prepared to consider. The alarm sounded at 0400 hours, piercing through Morrison's light sleep like a knife through silk. He had learned long ago to wake instantly and completely, a skill that served him well during his combat deployments and countless hours standing guard duty. As he pulled on his physical training uniform, Morrison could hear the sounds of American soldiers beginning their day throughout the barracks. The energy was different from British military installations, more aggressive, more urgent, as if every day might be the last chance to prepare for war. Major Chun was waiting for him outside the physical training facility, clipboard in hand, and a stopwatch hanging around her neck. She wore the same focused expression that Morrison had seen on drill sergeants throughout his career, the look of someone who was about to push human beings to their absolute limits. Beside her stood Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, a muscular Hispanic man whose arms looked like they could crush steel beams, and whose eyes held the quiet confidence of someone who had never met a physical challenge he couldn't overcome. "Good morning, Captain Morrison," Major Chin said, checking her watch. "Ready to see how Queen's Guard stack up against American paratroopers? Sergeant Rodriguez here holds 3 base records for physical fitness. He'll be conducting your evaluation and making sure everything is fair and properly documented." Morrison nodded respectfully to both officers. "Major, Sergeant, I appreciate the opportunity. Where would you like me to begin?" Sergeant Rodriguez stepped forward, studying Morrison with the calculating gaze of a man who had spent years identifying human weaknesses and strengths. "Captain, we're going to run you through our standard fitness assessment, plus a few extras that Major Chin specifically requested. Push-ups, sit-ups, 2-mile run, obstacle course, and a combat load march. After that, we'll see how you handle some of our specialized challenges. Fair warning, our standards are pretty high, and we don't make exceptions for international guests." The push-up test began immediately on the concrete pad behind the facility. Morrison dropped into position, his body forming a perfect plank as Sergeant Rodriguez explained the requirements. American military push-ups demanded complete range of motion, with the chest touching the ground and arms fully extending on each repetition. 2 minutes on the clock, with Rodriguez counting every rep and watching for any deviation from perfect form. Morrison began with steady, controlled movements, drawing on years of discipline and training. His breathing remained even and measured, each push-up executed with mechanical precision. After 30 seconds, he had completed 25 repetitions, putting him well ahead of the minimum standard, but still within the range where most soldiers began to struggle. American soldiers gathered around the testing area, some genuinely curious about the British Guard's capabilities, others clearly expecting to witness a ceremonial soldier's humiliation. As the clock ticked toward the 1-minute mark, Morrison maintained his pace despite feeling the familiar burn in his shoulders and chest. The weight of his body seemed to increase with each repetition, but he had experienced far worse during combat operations in Afghanistan. Carrying a wounded comrade through enemy fire while wearing full battle gear had taught him that the human body could endure incredible stress when properly motivated. The watching American soldiers began murmuring among themselves as Morrison continued without showing obvious signs of fatigue. Sergeant Rodriguez called out time intervals with mechanical precision: 1 minute, 1:30, 2 minutes. Morrison's final count was 68 push-ups, a score that exceeded the requirements for American soldiers 10 years younger. As he stood and brushed dust from his hands, Morrison noticed several American soldiers exchanging glances of surprise and respect. Major Chin made notes on her clipboard while maintaining her professional demeanor, but Morrison caught a brief smile that suggested approval. The sit-up test followed immediately, with Morrison lying on his back while Sergeant Rodriguez held his feet in position. 2 minutes to complete as many perfect repetitions as possible, with each sit-up requiring his elbows to touch his knees and his shoulder blades to touch the ground. Morrison attacked this challenge with the same methodical approach, counting silently while maintaining perfect form. His abdominal muscles, strengthened through years of standing at attention for hours while wearing heavy ceremonial equipment, responded with remarkable endurance. American soldiers continued gathering around the testing area as word spread that the British Guard was exceeding expectations. Morrison completed 72 sit-ups, another score that impressed even the skeptical observers. Sergeant Rodriguez's expression had shifted from professional neutrality to genuine interest, and Morrison sensed that his reputation among the American soldiers was beginning to change. The 2-mile run would be the real test of Morrison's cardiovascular fitness and mental toughness. Fort Bragg's running course wound through varied terrain including hills, wooded areas, and open fields that tested different aspects of endurance and adaptability. Morrison had always been a strong runner, but American military running standards were notoriously demanding, and the North Carolina heat was already building despite the early hour. Major Chun accompanied Morrison to the starting line in a military vehicle, explaining that she would monitor his progress and ensure his safety during the run. "Captain, our course record is just under 11 minutes, held by a Special Forces officer who set it 3 years ago. The minimum passing time is 15:30, but anything under 13 minutes puts you in excellent company. Are you ready?" Morrison stretched briefly and checked his running shoes, standard military issue that he had broken in during training runs around London. As he positioned himself at the starting line, Morrison thought about the countless hours he had spent running through Hyde Park and along the Thames, maintaining the fitness standards required for his ceremonial duties. Those peaceful morning runs seemed far removed from this moment, surrounded by American soldiers and facing a course designed to break the will of elite warriors. The starting signal echoed across the course, and Morrison began with a measured pace that he knew he could maintain for the full distance. The first mile wound through wooded trails where the canopy provided some relief from the rising sun, but the humidity was unlike anything he had experienced in Britain. Sweat began flowing freely after just a few minutes, and Morrison adjusted his breathing to compensate for the thicker air. American soldiers positioned along the course called out encouragement, and time splits as Morrison passed each checkpoint. Their initial skepticism had given way to genuine support, and Morrison found their enthusiasm surprisingly motivating. As he crested a particularly challenging hill at the halfway point, Major Chin's voice crackled through a radio held by a course monitor. "Morrison's on pace for 12:30. Looking strong." The second mile tested Morrison's mental resilience as much as his physical conditioning. The course opened into exposed fields where the sun beat down mercilessly, and the accumulated fatigue began affecting his form and pace. Morrison's military training had taught him that physical discomfort was temporary and could be overcome through mental discipline. He focused on maintaining steady breathing and efficient stride mechanics while ignoring the burning sensation in his lungs and legs. With half a mile remaining, Morrison encountered the course's final challenge, a steep uphill section that had broken many soldiers' hopes of achieving excellent times. American soldiers lined this portion of the route, offering water and shouting encouragement. Morrison attacked the hill with renewed energy, drawing on reserves he had developed during combat operations where failure meant death rather than simply poor evaluation scores. As he crested the final hill and saw the finish line ahead, Morrison heard cheering that seemed disproportionate to a simple fitness test. American soldiers who had started as skeptical observers were now genuinely excited to witness his performance. Morrison crossed the finish line with a time of 12 minutes and 18 seconds, earning applause and congratulations from soldiers who had begun the morning questioning his capabilities. Sergeant Rodriguez approached with obvious respect, offering a towel and water bottle while shaking his head in amazement. "Captain, I owe you an apology. I expected someone who looked good in a fancy uniform, but couldn't back it up with performance. That run time puts you in the top 5% of soldiers who've attempted this course. How the hell do you maintain that kind of conditioning while standing at attention all day?" Morrison accepted the water gratefully while catching his breath. "Sergeant, standing guard duty requires different muscles and mental discipline than most people realize. We're trained to ignore discomfort and maintain peak readiness at all times. Running is just another form of controlled suffering, and British soldiers have been practicing that for centuries." The obstacle course represented the day's final major challenge, and Morrison approached it with confidence built from his morning successes. The American military obstacle course was famous for its complexity and difficulty, featuring rope climbs, wall scaling, tunnel crawling, and balance challenges that tested every aspect of physical capability and courage. Morrison had trained on similar courses throughout his military career, but Fort Bragg's version was notoriously unforgiving. Major Chun explained the course requirements as they walked through each obstacle. Soldiers were expected to complete the entire sequence within a specified time limit while maintaining safety standards and demonstrating proper technique. Falling from certain obstacles meant starting that section over, and failure to complete any individual challenge resulted in overall failure for the test. Morrison began with rope climbing, an exercise that played to his strengths developed through years of ceremonial sword work and combat training. His technique was textbook perfect, using his legs to grip the rope while pulling with his arms in efficient alternating motions. American soldiers watching from the sidelines noted his smooth, controlled movement up the 30-foot rope and rapid descent using proper rappelling techniques. The wall scaling challenge tested Morrison's ability to overcome obstacles using minimal equipment and maximum determination. The 12-foot wooden wall offered no handholds or footholds, requiring soldiers to use upper body strength and climbing technique to reach the top and safely descend the opposite side. Morrison's approach was methodical and efficient, using momentum and leverage rather than brute force to overcome the obstacle. Balance beams and tunnel crawls tested different aspects of Morrison's physical capabilities and mental focus. The balance challenge required crossing a narrow beam while carrying extra weight, simulating conditions where soldiers might need to cross damaged bridges or navigate precarious terrain while fully loaded with equipment. Morrison's ceremonial training had taught him to maintain perfect posture and balance even under physical stress, and he crossed the beam without difficulty. The tunnel crawl simulated movement through confined spaces while under enemy fire, requiring soldiers to navigate a long, low passage while carrying equipment and maintaining noise discipline. Morrison's combat experience in Afghanistan had included similar situations in real combat conditions, and he moved through the tunnel with confidence and speed that impressed the American observers. Morrison completed the entire obstacle course with time to spare and technique that earned praise from Sergeant Rodriguez. As the morning's testing concluded, Morrison realized that he had not only met American military standards, but had exceeded them in several areas. The skeptical looks from American soldiers had been replaced by expressions of respect and curiosity about British military training methods. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when Captain Morrison found himself standing on Fort Bragg's weapons range, surrounded by American soldiers who had gathered to witness the British Guards' marksmanship abilities. Word of his impressive physical fitness performance had spread throughout the base overnight, transforming the evaluation from a routine assessment into something approaching a sporting event. Soldiers who had initially viewed him as a ceremonial curiosity now watched with genuine interest and respect. Major Chin arrived carrying a selection of weapons that represented the standard arsenal of American infantry forces. The M4 carbine, M240 machine gun, and M17 pistol were familiar to Morrison from joint training exercises, but the Americans had also included some specialized weapons that would test his adaptability and learning ability under pressure. The evaluation would measure not only his accuracy with familiar weapons, but also his capacity to master new systems quickly and effectively. Captain Morrison, Major Chin began, setting the weapons on a table beside the firing line. Today we're going to see how British marksmanship training compares to American standards. We'll start with weapons, then move to some systems that might be new to you. Our standards are pretty demanding, but based on yesterday's performance, I suspect you'll handle them just fine. Sergeant First Class Williams, the range instructor, was a lean man with weathered hands and eyes that had clearly spent decades studying the science of accurate shooting. His reputation as one of Fort Bragg's finest marksmen was evident in the respectful way other soldiers treated him and the casual confidence with which he handled every weapon on the range. Williams would oversee Morrison's shooting tests and ensure that scoring was fair and accurate. The M4 carbine test began with Morrison examining the weapon to familiarize himself with its specific characteristics and any differences from the British SA-80 rifle he normally carried. American and British military rifles operated on similar principles, but small variations in controls, sights, and handling could significantly affect performance. Morrison's approach was methodical and professional, checking the weapon's condition and adjusting the sights to match his natural shooting stance. The shooting course required Morrison to engage targets at multiple distances using different firing positions, simulating the varied conditions soldiers encountered in combat situations. Standing, kneeling, and prone positions each presented unique challenges for maintaining accuracy while managing the weapon's recoil and his own breathing patterns. Morrison's first magazine contained 20 rounds that would determine his baseline score and establish expectations for the remaining tests. American soldiers gathered behind the firing line, many genuinely curious about British shooting techniques and training methods. Morrison's shooting stance was slightly different from American doctrine, reflecting the distinct approaches developed by each military over decades of combat experience. As he settled into his first firing position, Morrison focused on the fundamentals that had been drilled into him during countless hours of training: sight alignment, breathing control, trigger squeeze, and follow-through. The first 10 rounds engaged targets at 300 meters, requiring precise aim and compensation for wind conditions that were different from anything Morrison had experienced in Britain. North Carolina's humidity and temperature created atmospheric conditions that affected bullet trajectory in subtle but important ways. Morrison's training had emphasized adaptability and the ability to adjust quickly to changing environmental factors. Sergeant Williams observed Morrison's technique through binoculars, calling out scores as each shot struck the target. The British Guards' performance was consistently impressive, with groupings that demonstrated both accuracy and precision under varying conditions. American soldiers began murmuring appreciation as Morrison's scores exceeded the minimum standards and approached the levels expected from their own marksmen. The remaining 10 rounds engaged closer targets that required rapid target acquisition and quick follow-up shots, simulating the fast-paced combat situations where soldiers needed to engage multiple enemies in sequence. Morrison's ceremonial training had included extensive practice with precise, controlled movements, and this discipline translated perfectly to rapid but accurate shooting. His final score with the M4 carbine earned nods of approval from Sergeant Williams and genuine applause from the watching American soldiers. The M240 machine gun presented a completely different challenge, requiring Morrison to demonstrate his ability to deliver sustained, accurate fire while managing a much heavier weapon with different recoil characteristics. Machine gun operation demanded understanding of ammunition conservation, barrel heating, and target prioritization that went beyond simple marksmanship skills. Morrison's combat experience in Afghanistan had included machine gun training, but the American version had subtle differences that required quick adaptation. Major Chun explained the machine gun test requirements as Morrison examined the weapon and its tripod mounting system. He would need to engage multiple targets at varying distances while managing ammunition effectively and maintaining the weapon's mechanical condition throughout sustained firing. The tests simulated defensive scenarios where machine gunners provided covering fire for advancing infantry or held positions against enemy attacks. Morrison's approach to the machine gun was more aggressive than his rifle technique, reflecting the weapon's role as an area suppression tool rather than a precision instrument. His burst patterns were controlled and effective, walking fire across target areas to simulate the suppressive effect that machine guns provided in real combat situations. American soldiers watching the demonstration noted Morrison's professional handling of the weapon and his obvious familiarity with machine gun tactics and employment. The pistol test concluded the marksmanship evaluation, requiring Morrison to demonstrate accuracy with the M17 sidearm under various stress conditions. Pistol shooting was notoriously difficult, requiring different techniques from rifle marksmanship and greater emphasis on hand-eye coordination. The test included both static target engagement and dynamic scenarios where Morrison moved between firing positions while engaging multiple targets in sequence. Morrison's pistol scores were equally impressive, demonstrating the comprehensive weapons training that British Guards received despite their ceremonial duties. Sergeant Williams recorded final scores that placed Morrison among the top performers who had attempted Fort Bragg's weapons evaluation, earning praise from American soldiers who had initially questioned his combat capabilities. The afternoon brought tactical exercises designed to test Morrison's decision-making abilities and leadership skills under simulated combat conditions. Major Chen led him to a training area where American soldiers had constructed a mock urban environment complete with buildings, vehicles, and obstacles that replicated the challenging conditions of modern warfare. Morrison would command a mixed unit of American and British personnel through various scenarios that tested his tactical thinking and ability to adapt to unfamiliar situations. The first scenario placed Morrison in command of a 12-man squad tasked with clearing a hostile building and securing valuable intelligence. Half of his soldiers were American paratroopers unfamiliar with British tactics, while the others were British soldiers who had been temporarily assigned to Fort Bragg for the exercise. Morrison's challenge was integrating these different military cultures and combat approaches into an effective fighting unit. American and British soldiers approached urban combat with different philosophies developed through decades of experience in various conflicts. Americans emphasized aggressive movement and overwhelming firepower, while British doctrine stressed careful planning and methodical execution. Morrison needed to find the optimal balance between these approaches while considering the specific requirements of his mission and the capabilities of his mixed unit. Morrison began with a detailed briefing that outlined his tactical plan and assigned specific roles to each team member. His approach combined British thoroughness with American adaptability, establishing clear objectives while maintaining flexibility to respond to changing conditions. American soldiers noted his professional demeanor and obvious expertise in small unit tactics, while the British personnel appreciated his respect for their training and experience. The building clearance operation began with Morrison's team establishing security around the target structure, while reconnaissance teams gathered intelligence about enemy positions and building layout. Morrison's coordination of these preliminary activities demonstrated his understanding of complex tactical operations and his ability to manage multiple moving parts simultaneously. Major Chun observed from a position that allowed her to monitor Morrison's leadership style and decision-making process. As the actual building assault began, Morrison demonstrated the aggressive leadership that combat operations demanded while maintaining the careful control necessary to prevent casualties and achieve mission objectives. His commands were clear and decisive. His positioning allowed him to maintain control over the entire operation, and his tactical decisions showed sophisticated understanding of urban warfare principles. The building clearance proceeded smoothly under Morrison's direction, with American and British soldiers working together effectively despite their different training backgrounds. Morrison adapted his leadership style to accommodate both groups, providing detailed guidance to those who needed it while allowing experienced soldiers the freedom to use their initiative. The operation concluded successfully with all objectives achieved and no simulated casualties among Morrison's forces. The second tactical scenario tested Morrison's ability to conduct defensive operations, requiring him to organize his unit's defense of a strategic position against a numerically superior enemy force. This situation demanded different leadership skills, emphasizing preparation, resource management, and the ability to inspire soldiers facing difficult odds. Morrison's defensive plan demonstrated thorough understanding of terrain analysis, fields of fire, and the psychological factors that affected defensive operations. Morrison's defensive preparations were methodical and comprehensive, positioning his soldiers to maximize their effectiveness while minimizing their vulnerability to enemy attacks. His use of available terrain and obstacles showed sophisticated tactical thinking, and his communication with subordinate leaders ensured that everyone understood their roles and responsibilities. American officers observing the exercise noted Morrison's calm professionalism and obvious competence in defensive tactics. The simulated enemy attack tested every aspect of Morrison's defensive plan and his ability to adapt to changing battlefield conditions. His leadership during the engagement was exemplary, maintaining control over his forces while making rapid tactical adjustments to counter enemy movements. Morrison's decisions under pressure demonstrated the mental toughness and quick thinking that successful military leaders required. The final tactical exercise placed Morrison in an ambiguous situation where the rules of engagement were unclear and political considerations complicated military objectives. This scenario tested his judgment and ability to make difficult decisions without clear guidance from higher authority. Morrison's handling of this complex situation impressed American observers with its sophistication and understanding of the broader implications of military actions. Major Chin's evaluation of Morrison's tactical performance was overwhelmingly positive, noting his exceptional leadership abilities and tactical knowledge. American soldiers who had worked under his command during the exercises expressed genuine respect for his capabilities and professionalism. The tactical tests had proven that Morrison's skills extended far beyond ceremonial duties and that British military training produced leaders capable of succeeding in the most demanding combat situations. The final week of Morrison's evaluation began with an unexpected development that would fundamentally change the nature of his assessment and shock military observers on both sides of the Atlantic. Major Chin arrived at his quarters before dawn on Monday morning with news that Pentagon officials had been following his performance with intense interest. What had started as a routine cultural exchange had evolved into something far more significant when Morrison's exceptional scores reached the highest levels of American military leadership. "Captain Morrison," Major Chin began, her expression more serious than he had seen throughout the evaluation. "I have some news that's going to change our remaining schedule considerably. Your performance has attracted attention from Washington that none of us anticipated. General Patterson, who commands Special Operations Command, has personally requested that we expand your evaluation to include some tests that are normally reserved for our most elite units." Morrison listened carefully as Major Chin explained that his scores in physical fitness, marksmanship, and tactical leadership had exceeded not only the standards for regular infantry, but also the benchmarks used for Special Forces selection. Pentagon analysts studying his performance had identified capabilities that suggested British ceremonial guards received training that was far more comprehensive and demanding than American military planners had previously understood. The revelation came with both opportunities and challenges that Morrison had never anticipated when he first accepted the invitation to Fort Bragg. General Patterson's interest meant that Morrison would have access to training facilities and evaluation protocols that were normally classified and restricted to American Special Operations personnel. However, it also meant that the expectations for his performance had increased dramatically, and failure would have implications that extended far beyond his personal reputation. "Sir," Morrison replied, maintaining the professional composure that had characterized his entire military career, "I'm honored by General Patterson's interest and ready to face whatever challenges you believe are appropriate. However, I want to ensure that my performance, whether successful or unsuccessful, is viewed as representative of British military training rather than exceptional individual capability. The Queen's Guard has produced many soldiers with similar qualifications." Major Chin smiled at Morrison's response, clearly appreciating his loyalty to his unit and his country. "Captain, that's exactly why General Patterson wants to expand your evaluation. Your performance suggests that British military culture produces capabilities that we may have underestimated. Understanding those capabilities could improve cooperation between our forces and help us learn from each other's approaches to soldier development. The expanded evaluation would include psychological resilience testing, advanced tactical simulations, and leadership challenges that pushed subjects to their absolute mental and physical limits. These assessments were normally used to select candidates for the most demanding special operations missions, and they had failure rates that exceeded 70% even among highly qualified volunteers. Morrison would be the first foreign soldier ever subjected to these particular evaluations. The psychological resilience testing began immediately after Morrison's briefing with Major Chin, conducted by Dr. Sarah Martinez, a military psychologist who specialized in evaluating soldiers for high-stress assignments. Dr. Martinez had developed assessment protocols that identified individuals capable of maintaining effectiveness under extreme pressure, and her recommendations carried significant weight in special operations selection processes. "Captain Morrison, Dr. Martinez explained as they entered her testing facility, psychological resilience is often the determining factor in special operations success. Physical capabilities and technical skills are important, but mental toughness separates those who succeed from those who fail when everything goes wrong. We're going to put you through some scenarios that are designed to test your limits. The first psychological test placed Morrison in a sensory deprivation chamber where he experienced complete darkness and silence for extended periods while researchers monitored his stress responses and mental state. This evaluation simulated the isolation and uncertainty that special operations personnel often experience during covert missions or captivity situations. Morrison's ceremonial guard training had included extensive practice in maintaining mental focus during long periods of motionless duty, and this experience proved invaluable during the sensory deprivation test. Morrison's performance in the isolation chamber exceeded expectations, with monitoring equipment showing stress levels that remained within acceptable ranges throughout the extended session. Dr. Martinez noted that his ability to maintain mental stability without external stimulation was exceptional and suggested extensive previous experience with similar challenges. When Morrison emerged from the chamber after 6 hours, he appeared calm and focused rather than disoriented or stressed. The Advanced Tactical Simulation Test took place in Fort Bragg's most sophisticated training facility, a computer-controlled environment that could replicate virtually any combat scenario with photorealistic accuracy and genuine physical consequences for poor decisions. Morrison found himself commanding a special operations team through a series of missions that required split-second decision-making and perfect coordination between team members who existed only as computer-generated projections. The simulation began with a hostage rescue mission that placed Morrison's team in an urban environment surrounded by hostile forces and civilian bystanders. The computer system monitored every decision Morrison made, evaluating his tactical choices, risk assessment capabilities, and ability to balance mission objectives against potential casualties. Morrison's performance demonstrated sophisticated understanding of special operations tactics and principles that surprised his American evaluators. As the simulation progressed through increasingly complex scenarios, Morrison's leadership abilities and tactical innovation continued to exceed expectations. He successfully adapted to equipment failures, changing mission parameters, and unexpected enemy actions while maintaining team cohesion and achieving primary objectives. American officers monitoring the exercise noted that Morrison's performance compared favorably to their own special operations personnel. The final leadership challenge placed Morrison in command of a real American special operations team during a live-fire exercise that tested his ability to lead elite soldiers under actual combat conditions. This unprecedented test had never been offered to a foreign soldier, and its approval required authorization from the highest levels of the Pentagon. Morrison would command 12 Green Berets through a complex mission that combined all the skills and capabilities he had demonstrated throughout his evaluation. The mission scenario involved rescuing captured intelligence operatives from a heavily defended compound while avoiding civilian casualties and preventing enemy forces from destroying valuable information. Morrison's team consisted of some of America's most experienced special operations soldiers, men who had served in the most dangerous conflicts around the world and who initially questioned whether a ceremonial guard could lead them effectively in combat situations. Morrison's pre-mission briefing demonstrated the same professional competence and attention to detail that had characterized his previous performances, but commanding actual Green Berets required an additional level of credibility and tactical expertise. These soldiers had worked with the world's finest military leaders, and they would quickly identify any weaknesses or inadequacies in Morrison's leadership abilities. Morrison knew that earning their respect would be more challenging than any previous test he had faced. The mission began with Morrison's team infiltrating the target area under cover of darkness, using night vision equipment and advanced communication systems to coordinate their movements. Morrison's leadership during the approach phase was calm and confident, with clear instructions and tactical decisions that demonstrated his understanding of special operations procedures. American soldiers noted his professional demeanor and obvious competence in complex tactical situations. As the team reached the target compound, Morrison demonstrated the aggressive decision-making and tactical flexibility that special operations required. His assault plan was innovative and effective, using surprise and superior tactics to overcome defenders who outnumbered his forces significantly. American Green Berets following Morrison's commands found themselves impressed by his tactical creativity and leadership abilities under genuine pressure. The hostage rescue operation proceeded flawlessly under Morrison's direction, with all objectives achieved and no casualties among either the assault team or the rescued personnel. Morrison's coordination of the assault, extraction, and exfiltration phases demonstrated mastery of special operations tactics that exceeded what most observers had believed possible for a ceremonial guard. His performance during the Live Fire exercise earned genuine respect from American Special Operations personnel who had initially been skeptical of his capabilities. The shocking outcome of Morrison's evaluation was revealed during a ceremony attended by senior officers from both American and British military commands. General Patterson himself presented the results, which showed that Morrison had not only passed every test administered to him but had achieved scores that ranked among the top 5% of all soldiers ever evaluated at Fort Bragg. His performance in psychological resilience, tactical leadership, and combat effectiveness had exceeded the standards used for America's most elite military units. "Ladies and gentlemen," General Patterson announced to the assembled officers, "Captain Morrison's performance has fundamentally changed our understanding of British military capabilities and the quality of training provided to ceremonial guards. His scores in every category would qualify him for immediate acceptance into any special operations unit in the American military, and his leadership abilities have impressed some of our finest officers." The implications of Morrison's performance extended far beyond personal recognition, suggesting that British military culture and training methods produced capabilities that American planners had significantly underestimated. Pentagon officials announced plans for expanded cooperation between British and American Special Operations Forces, with particular emphasis on learning from British approaches to soldier development and leadership training. Morrison's success also led to invitations for additional Queen's Guards to participate in similar evaluations, with the goal of better understanding the factors that contributed to their exceptional performance. The ceremonial duties that many observers had viewed as purely decorative were revealed to be components of a comprehensive training system that developed remarkable military capabilities. As Morrison prepared to return to Britain, he reflected on the journey that had brought him from the courtyards of Buckingham Palace to the training facilities of Fort Bragg. His 2 weeks in America had proven that British military traditions and American combat capabilities could complement each other in ways that strengthened both forces. The respect he had earned from American soldiers validated not only his personal abilities, but also the centuries of military excellence that the Queen's Guard represented. The story of Morrison's evaluation became legendary within military circles on both sides of the Atlantic, inspiring new approaches to international cooperation and mutual respect between allied forces. His performance had shocked everyone involved, proving that true military excellence could emerge from unexpected sources and that the scarlet uniforms and ceremonial duties of the Queen's Guard concealed warriors capable of succeeding in the most demanding combat situations imaginable.